clubs?
Yeah, I think certainly for them, the driving force that we've seen over the last couple of years has been financial. We know the financial situation at Barcelona has not been great. We know Real Madrid have had problems as well. I think the other thing with those two clubs as well that we've seen is a real stubbornness to to dig their heels in as well. They wanted to be proved right, and in a way, that verdict does prove them right. Part of their argument was that UEFA and FIFA were acting unlawfully by blocking it, and that's been proved to be the case. But that was one part of a much bigger picture, and I think what's hurt Barcelona and Real Madrid along the way is all the other clubs that have moved away from the project. And again, I think you can go back to some wider things there about the state of the European football market as an example. So the Premier League and its clubs don't need the Super League. In Germany, it's very different because they have different kind of cultural values on football. They've got the 50+1 ownership model, and there's a lot there that they can say no to. You've then had some of the bigger clubs in, France and Italy being involved and then pulling out, and I think it's symptomatic also of Barca and Real's position in Spain. Yes, they are dominant, but where are they seeing the growth? And I don't think they're seeing as much growth as potentially the Premier League's got to offer. And those are little things there where it becomes about, well, now I'm going to look at my own self-interest. And you can see how they've tried to leverage that through the Super League, which, as you quite rightly say, at the end of the day, comes down to finance. And certainly in the early stages of it, it was all about money for those two clubs. And don't get me wrong, it probably still is. But I think a lot of it then was also they felt like they needed to see the case through because they dug their heels in and they were sticking behind the project.
You said something.
Yeah, there seems to be an awful lot to talk about with this, but actually, I think when you strip it back at the moment, there's not a lot that's changed. The biggest thing, I suppose, for the Super League project is that the ruling was that FIFA and UEFA acted unlawfully in blocking that competition. But there's also that kind of narrative underneath that if a competition ever came to pass, it would have to be run through the relevant, people that it would compete with anyway. And UEFA have already started to change their rules slightly post 2021 and will continue to do so, you would guess, to try and offset the threat of a Super League. So there was kind of, the Super League were claiming a big victory yesterday, and there was, kind of a lot in there that they can take positives from. But UEFA are still very much in the driving seat in European football. I don't think the Super League is dead necessarily, but also it doesn't appear to be imminent. So I think there's going to be a lot of toing and froing along the way. It won't go away, but yeah, I suppose in the grand scheme of things, not a lot has changed, even with a verdict that might seem quite big.
And so reckon it'll have any impact on that at all?
Well, so that's obviously in play, the new Champions League model, and will be rolled out. There's a broadcast deal that's been signed for that for the next 3 to 4 years. I think what we don't know with that yet is how well it will be received in the long run. So obviously you've got a competition change there, which moves a long way away from the model that we are used to. As always with football, it'll be, related to, are the broadcasters willing to pay billions to be involved in the future, and are commercial sponsors and partners likely to do the same? And I think the answer to that at the minute is, UEFA have managed to gain an uplift on the previous Champions League deal, which has, kept the clubs happy for now, but the clubs will want to see revenue growth in that model as well. So I think it will be interesting to see how it plays out. I don't think it changes anything in the short term because that competition is ready to go. I think it'll be how that competition is received in the future from the clubs, from consumers, from broadcasters, from sponsors and partners. And then we'll see what happens in the kind of next wave of broadcasting deals. You're always kind of looking at the minute for the next broadcasting rights negotiation, and when that's coming to an end, and then that being a trigger point for maybe something else happening.
In the Super League previously? Yeah,
for sure. And I think, you've made probably the most relevant point there at the minute is how much people are paying currently for, sports subscription content. And, talking from a basis of obviously being located in the UK, it's not cheap. If you want a Sky Sports subscription, a TNT Sports subscription, the Amazon one that's still in play at the minute, and in the future, what that might look like, if you want all those things, it does become quite costly to the fan. So to have something that is free at the point of consumption is obviously a hook for fans to come on board with it. And again, I think the way that's going to be perceived will be different in different territories as well. I think we've clearly seen the backlash in the UK with the English clubs, and many English fans, even if it is free to air and dependent on the clubs that would ever be involved, I think some would still turn around and say no, thank you very much, even if it's free, I'm not interested. But there is a whole range of international fans out there now that follow European football and that follow some of these clubs, and maybe some of those are interested. And I think we have to look at it through that lens as well. You look at it through your own lens, but you also have to look at it through the lens of others. And yeah, obviously it's a ploy in that regard, as you say, to try and get some positivity on board by offering it free to air.
100%. And I've just got a couple. Do you feel that the Super League needs English clubs?
Yes, I think that's absolutely the way to position it at the moment. And I think that I'm not saying that it would never happen, I think is the other thing. I know there's all, because also, of course, in English football, we've got the independent regulator potentially on the horizon. And we know that they are looking at putting something in the legislation that would block English clubs from joining a Super League if it came to pass. So that's a different angle to look at as well. But yeah, I think, even if you remove that, and we saw this at the time as well, perhaps with a backlash and the repositioning of some of the biggest clubs' arguments, the Premier League clubs don't really need to go following the Super League, but the Super League would be better with English clubs. And, we don't know how that might play out. And again, I think, to go back to an answer on an earlier question, I don't think the Super League idea is ever going to be fully dead in the water. I think, we'll see it in some way, shape or form, and maybe it will happen. But the English situation is a bit of a problem for them, I would say, because you're talking about wanting the biggest clubs in the world to be part of it. And, there are some very big English clubs there that are already, ruled themselves out.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so what the independent regulator is looking to do, if it gets passed, and obviously if it's government backed, then you are talking about, rule changes that you can put in there that are would become sort of legally binding. And the one with the Super League that they're trying to put in, which again was born out of the 2021, the way that unfolded and the kind of chaos behind it. What they want to do, and it's in the working documentation, is they want to be able to have the independent regulator to be able to veto effectively clubs moving out of the English football system and going to play in breakaway competitions. So that's what they're trying to get in. It's not legally binding yet. We're a long way off the independent regulator being legally binding. There's a lot of work to do in that space, despite the fact that it looks like it might be coming. So I think, again, that kind of goes back to, while ever these things are a little bit up in the air, the next 2 to 3 years become really interesting, because as we started off with saying, that this was big news, on Thursday when it broke. But it's, again, one very small piece of a much bigger jigsaw that's going to play out over the next 2 to 3 years. And the independent regulator for English football is a big contributing factor there, and what they're trying to do, which may or may not, limit any English club's involvement in anything like this in the future.